An interesting question posed to me earlier this week is what should be the Christian's posture, position on, say, or relationship to horror content? Specifically, like theatrical content, movies, and so forth. But what about games? What about things of this nature? What should a Christian do with those? Is it a anathema? Should we completely avoid such things? Is it okay to embrace them? Um, like, what should we do? And so, let's get into it. Now, let's first off talk about what horror is. It's a type of media, usually theater, maybe, or like a movie, or television, or even gaming, that is intended to incite a sense of anxiety, most often in regards to fear, or like fear of outcome, or a sense of anxiety related to that everything that you are experiencing is not quite what it appears to be. And so maybe like the master of horror might be Alfred Hitchcock. That psychological, gradual, slow burn type horror, psychological horror, like a Rear Window maybe, that involves, as you're watching the movie, you begin to learn things about it that change your opinion about the characters or the settings in various ways that challenge your presuppositions. A second form would, of course, be the supernatural type of horror, right? The ghosts, Ouija boards, demons, any sort of spiritual, supernatural type fear, anxiety, maybe even mental health type focused things that are things of that nature. And then third might be the slasher film, right? The blood squirting everywhere, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, things of that nature, corny or campy special effects, and things like, you know what I'm talking about. And then fourth might be the historical or based on true events type, which of course can overlap with any of the three that I just mentioned, but also include things like documentaries involving serial killers or fictionalized narratives based on recent events, or and then last, this could go on and on and on, but the last would be like the conspiracy theory type things. The individual is being plagued by a shadowy organization, or it might be couched in racial language, or who knows, like it can go any number of ways, right? All of those different things. What should a Christian do when a movie of this sort comes out? If a show is produced, an American Horror Story or something of that nature, or I don't know, a video game, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, what should a Christian do? And I would say, first of all, use your better judgment. It's very easy to, well, I'll just Google this and see what fill in the blank organization thinks about it, or I'll read a Wikipedia page, or I'll ask my pastor, and then I'll just go with their opinion as if it's my own. I'll just adopt it. And there's some problems there. Obviously, submitting to spiritual leadership that's in your direct life, like your pastor, your social circles leaders, small group leaders, or Sunday school teachers, things of that nature, like hearing their opinion and then submitting to it is a good idea. Your parents, especially if you live in their house, is a good idea. But you also want to be aware of where their perspective is coming from. You don't want to just grab their opinion and run with it. You also want to learn where their information is coming from, because there's a lot of hyperbole about these things, especially from like the 80s and 90s, that hasn't quite worn off of the idea you go to see The Exorcist, you'll come out with a demon, or if you enjoy slasher films, that you are going to shoot up a school in the future. Like, just really hyperbolic, alarmist nonsense is really what that is. So take that for what it is. The next thing would be, I would be highly cautious about anything that's intended to induce fear, including, I would actually include in this, news broadcasts. They prey on the idea of fear a lot, but you should be very cautious around anything that should induce anxiety or fear. And then consider, do you already have problems with mental health, anxiety, or fear? Do you already struggle with those things? Because if you do, don't add gas onto that fire, right? Obviously, we know about stories of children having nightmares and so forth as a result of watching some scary movie, and we think that that's silly. But we also shouldn't consider the fact that just because I'm a big kid now does not mean that I am immune to those sorts of messagings or imagery getting into my mind and affecting me later. You shouldn't. And I'm still against the idea that you're inevitably going to shoot up a school, or that you're going to commit suicide because you watched a movie one time. I don't think that. But I do think that we should be mindful of what is in this piece of media of any kind, and what is in me that is being entertained by that piece of media. That it goes for crass and crude comedy. That goes for action movies that can that glorify violence or the sexualization of females. That goes for horror movies that revel or glorify the supernatural violence or the trivialization of violence. Like, it's a pretty common thing with especially the kind of the campy horror of, at some point as an audience member, you start to root against the characters on the screen. Final Destination did this the most explicitly in one of their DVD releases, where it would give you a prompt, almost like a QuickTime event, where you would have the ability to decide whether or not somebody gets to live or die in the scene. And it's something I would translate as well when you're watching the news and seeing things, and that there's a faraway place somewhere experiencing violence, and people calling for added violence against people that are strangers to them. Eat the rich, or kill the rich, or things of that nature, political individuals, corporate magnates, whoever. We should be a lot more careful about what these things say about our individual value for a human life, a real one or even a fictional one, and what that's abrading within us. And like, just consider that. If you thought about, man, why do I enjoy this? Because we do this when we watch things from like nostalgia-fueled things from our past. Cartoons that you grew up on or something, you watch it again, you're like, what was I doing? Why did I like this? And you realize that there was things in you that you've matured out of, that because you've matured out of the core of what was entertained by that piece of media, you're no longer able to enjoy it the way that you once had. And that's a good thing to recognize. But that's something we should also do even with the classical, like 60s, 70s black and white, or even older than that, like 20s, 30s black and white monster movies. What are you watching, and why are you watching it? What is inside of you that's being drawn towards it? Because that might not be a sign of spiritual health, or it might be a sign of spiritual unhealth, I should say, that you are entertained by certain things. And then, of course, recognizing, you know what? It is just entertainment sometimes. Not everything is just entertainment. If you go through to the production teams and things, some of these things are done intentionally with a message behind them. And that message gets into your spirit or into your mind, whether you realize it or not. And that's why things like art theory and art interpretation classes exist at the university and college level. You go back and you dissect zombie movies or things like that, and you find out that there's a lot of stuff in there that's not just blood squirting or so forth. So what is also being brought into your spirit as almost like a chaser behind the crass humor or the see some boobies or the whatever it is that you went into this movie for? What else is behind that that's following it down the pipe? And the last thing I would consider is, which I kind of broached from the very beginning, of being careful about what an opinion is and what has sourced it, is you want to be very wary of legalism in this matter. Just because you have a sensitivity about something like a horror movie or a horror movie genre or crude humor or something, just because you have a personal sensitivity regarding that content stream does not mean that you should impose that onto others. We see this kind of adjacently addressed by Peter and Paul in the New Testament, where Paul is saying, like, listen, some people eat meat, some people don't, and that the one who eats should not judge the one who does not eat, and the one who does not eat should not judge the one who does. That we should act with grace and mercy and the assumption of innocence to everyone that's a believer, no matter what, and not consign someone to hell just because they like a genre of entertainment that you don't like. Of course, with boundaries around it, because this, of course, this line of reasoning doesn't apply to things like pornography, doesn't apply to things like, I don't know, and even, like, I'd say it doesn't apply to scare porn, you know, the movies where it's just crass sexual content, or things like, yeah, okay, fine, you like swords and boards type fantasy. That's not an excuse to indulge the overtly pornographic Game of Thrones. Just watch Lord of the Rings like everyone else. Like, you don't need to go, because our sinful hearts will reach for anything possible to justify its sinful nature. And it'll look for any place to hide, including, oh, it's historical. Oh, it's based on true events. Or whatever, right? This is what human beings do. So just be careful, be prayerful, and then also recognize the fact that if you spend an hour in the movie theater, you're spending an additional opportunity cost that could be going to something else. And that's not to say that you have to constantly spend your life with your nose in a Bible or in a prayer circle. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you are by default spending time on something that you could be spending time on something else, and recognizing what that cost is, and then reckoning with whether or not it truly is worthwhile.